All right. Welcome back. This is part two of Domestic America and European Discovery. Last time we had left off, we were talking about the Incan Empire um, and the doing roughly kind of a comparison contrast, if you will, or actually more of a contrast, or excuse me, a comparison of certain characteristics as they with other kind of human aspects of centralized, more imperial, if you will, types of settlement and administration. Um, I'll have to another. Actually, just let me check something. Okay. The second major civilization, that being the Mayan, which were located roughly in what is today, or primarily in what is today, the Yucatan Peninsula of what is predominantly southern Mexico, or parts of Central America, which also, I should say, includes the states of Honduras and the like. This is the oldest of the three civilizations. It lasted from about 300 to 1000 AD. So it wasn't necessarily a pronounced or arguably a distinct civilization by the time of European contact. But what it did do was to act as a cultural reservoir for the Aztec populations that we'll get into. So I do want to spend some time talking about the Mayans and their contributions because they were considerable. They were more loosely affiliated. They're often described as kind of being a collection of city states or city like states that kind of exhibited a common cultural and political characteristics. They were successful in constructing large temples and urban centers. They were also master craft workers when it came to things like creating fine jewelry, again, through the use primarily of or making use of precious metals. They also adopted a form of writing, which meant that they were successful and accomplished when it came to the organization of a highly accurate um, calendar, um, which included a 365-day cycle. Uh, this achievement when it came to accurate timekeeping was based on astronomical and astrological study. Again, kind of conveying a sense of advanced contemplation. In many cases, again, they were not the only ones to come up with a calendar with a 365-day cycle that we continue to use, obviously. But the ancient Egyptians also came up with a 365-day calendar as well. So, again, independent types of human civilizations, human settlements coming to the same conclusions is rather remarkable here. The Mayans were also a hierarchical society. They ruled by a class of nobles and priests. Oftentimes, or there were periods in which city states would compete with one another, resulting occasionally in violence. In many cases, this served as the source for undermining any greater um, gravitation towards more centralized control within the Mayan experience. Uh, so, in the one case, these independent city states became more they kind of thrived as a result of the competition between one another. But this also, at the same time, offered a gateway to future exploitation, primarily from outside sources. Those outside sources, best represented by the Aztec people, the Aztec culture, or I should say, the Aztec Empire itself, which was located farther to the north in parts of what is today areas centered primarily around what is today Mexico City. The Aztec civilization, the third of the major three civilizations in Central and South America, was dominant from about the year 1100 to roughly 1500 CE. The largest city of Aztec settlement contained somewhere uh, between 250,000 and 300,000 residents. It was at the time one of the largest cities in the world, that being the city of Tenochtitlan, the last term here on the slide. This slide. Again, I believe it's in your textbook, page 365, that they have this uh, a kind of map of Tenochtitlan itself. This is, in many cases, its foundations um, serve as the foundations of what is today Mexico City in many respects. And it was also the site of extensive engineering accomplishments, that there were great advancements made in things like irrigation, flood control, and the like. So, again, as you might expect, when you're supporting a population of hundreds of thousands of people in a pre industrial society, it becomes necessary to have kind of the engineering facilities and capabilities in order to provide the food, the water, the resources necessary to sustain that amount of life in one place all at the same time. Culturally speaking, the Aztecs took a great deal of their cultural identity and heritage from the Mayans themselves. Um, the Aztecs are often deemed to be more of an aggressive culture bent on conquest and exploitation. Those conquered could be offered up for human sacrifice in many cases. There are instances in which as many as 20,000 people were sacrificed in order to appease the Aztec gods. Those that had been conquered and subjugated by the Aztecs were often oppressed and brutalized, which provided, once the Europeans arrived on scene, it provided them with willing allies in many cases to support in overthrowing the Aztecs and their king. And this allowed the Europeans in many cases to play tribes off or populations off against one another. Um, and so a relatively small number of conquistadors, Spanish, um, conquistadors could, had kind of exponential kinds of abilities at their disposal in order to kind of offset their minimal numbers, but project a tremendous amount of influence and power, again through the playing off of enemies against one another. Of course, first contact is established on a permanent basis by um, Christopher Columbus. It should be noted that the Vikings, there is evidence of Vikings coming to the New World, landing in what is today Nova Scotia, which is in today's Canada. Um, but this didn't result in any permanent settlement. It would have to wait another 500 years or so until Christopher Columbus would rediscover, in many cases, the Western Hemisphere. And of course, he did so by proposing to sail west in order to reach the Far East. He pitched this idea to the King and Queen of Spain, newly united state within Europe. And initially, once he won the backing of the Spanish uh, crown um, and succeeded in making his way across the Atlantic, he initially mistook the Americas for a series of island chains like those found in the Pacific. So, kind of using this map here on our slide. Of course, Columbus is going to make landfall here in the Caribbean archipelago. And because of his misunderstanding of where he thought he was on the face of the earth, he called Native Americans Indians, believing that he was much closer to India than he was actually where he was in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, this first contact is established in 1492. You can see an image of Columbus here. Um, and would serve as the origins of European colonization of the New World, which would continue, of course, in earnest over the course of the next several hundred years. Columbus would return to the Americas on three other occasions, uh, making transits to the New World for a total of four times. In each instance, he was interested in trying not to explore what he had discovered, or again, in the Western context, discovered, but he was more interested in trying to get through, bypass this area, and find some route, some navigable route to the Far East. Uh, each time, of course, this would end in failure. But almost immediately, the discovery that Columbus made, once news got back to Europe about it, this is going to create a new potential source of conflict within European powers and between European powers themselves, which would result the in the case of the potential tensions arising between Spain and Portugal, the two leading maritime powers of Europe at this time. uh, it was going to result in a new treaty, the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. This is an agreement between these two powers, Spain and Portugal, again, to divide the world's undiscovered territories between these two European rivals. This is largely the result of the efforts made by the sitting Roman Catholic Pope, Alexander VI. He issued a papal bull saying that um, all land east, or I should say, all undiscovered land or unclaimed land west of this line, arbitrarily drawn on the known maps of the world, again, European maps of the world, would be reserved for Spanish settlement. Lines east of, I should say again, unclaimed lands lying east of this line would be reserved for Portuguese settlement. And that was largely because, again, not only was Columbus making claims or beginning to establish, was Spain, through the likes of Columbus, beginning to lay claim to um, what we know to be the Caribbean and central parts and southern parts of South America, but now also the Portuguese were beginning to uh, establish a kind of daisy chain of settlements along the shoreline of the African continent. So, just as Columbus was trying to sail west in order to reach the Far East, the Portuguese were trying to find some sort of way of circumnavigating the entirety of the African continent itself in order to get to the Orient or to the Far East. The last thing that the Catholic Pope needed was to have these two Catholic countries going to war over overlapping or completing spheres of influence. And so, as a result, this Treaty of Tordesillas was drafted. In the wake of that agreement, each country immediately looked to capitalize on previous expeditions that had and continue in earnest the pursuit of trying to reach the um, the Far East. So both Spain and Portugal are trying to reach this area of the world. They're just going about it in different ways. It would be the success of Vasco da Gama, you can see an image of here, um, sailing under the Portuguese flag, that would be successful in rounding the Horn of which I should say the Cape of Good Hope, the southern kind of tip of the African continent, successfully circumnavigating the entirety of the African continent itself, making his way into the Indian Ocean and beginning to make landfall in India proper. This happened during his 1497 and 1498 expedition. His successful trade with and for exotic goods coming out of India. When he returned to Portugal, his expedition turned a 400% profit from this successful voyage. So immediately, the lucrative return on investment here was clear and undeniable that the European power that was going to open up trade and sustain trade with the Far East was going to be at an economic advantage, a severe economic advantage moving forward. And so as a result, this is going to compel, it's going to require, in many cases, European powers to put to put colonization, exploration at the top of their kind of wish list. What's interesting in the wake of Da Gama's success is that, and with the kind of opening of trade and having opened specifically a naval trade, a water route to the the Far East that broke the monopoly that Venetian merchants and Constantinople and had on the lucrative and exotic trade of goods coming into Europe, because there was now at least one alternate route to do so. This meant that for the Spanish explorers moving forward, that they began to turn attention towards understanding and unlocking, investigating, if you will, the potential wealth and benefits coming from the New World itself. In 1519, you have Hernan Cortez, a Spanish conquistador, landing along the coast of what is today Mexico, in command of some 600 troops. The strategy here was rather simple: to subdue the Aztecs, to claim the land in the name of the Spanish king, to convert as many of the indigenous population to Christianity as possible, and to exploit the wealth of the land. So this is often referred to in kind of a slogan-like form of glory for the sovereign of the Spanish state, God converting the indigenous people to Christianity, and gold, to kind of extract as much wealth as possible. When Cortez makes landfall, very quickly he begins to move into the interior of what we know to be Mexico, the state of Mexico today. Um, and before long, he encounters the sitting Aztec emperor, a man by the name of Montezuma II. Initially, Montezuma considered Cortez and his men to be the emissaries of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. Um, Aztec legend had it that this god had left the world, left the land, and would return one day. And it just so happened that, according to those legends, it would happen in the year or near the year in which Hernan Cortez landed along with his troops, and it would happen with the god coming from the east, just as Hernan Cortez, by coincidence, had done. Um, it wouldn't take long before the Aztecs realized, that Cortez and his men were not quasi divine, or even divine. Um, the Aztecs, had initially showered them with gifts, wealth, tributes, food, housing, within the city of Tenochtitlan itself. But very quickly, relations soured. The Aztecs rose up and managed to push the conquistadors out of Tenochtitlan for a brief period. Once the Spanish rallied, kind of reorganized and regrouped, they were able to take the city by force. They were aided by what you might say for the day and age were more modern technologies, things like the use of the horse, steel, weapons, but also, of course, firearms. And they were also bolstered by a nearly invisible ally, which we'll talk about in the in this lecture later on. In keeping with the theme of conquistadors that are going to turn an increasing amount of attention towards exploiting the wealth and the people of the Americas. You have the conquest of the Incas and the Incan Empire coming at the hands of Francisco Pizarro, who on November 16th of 1532 led 168 soldiers into the Incan Empire, perhaps at the time the most powerful empire in the Americas. Much like Hernan Cortez, Francisco Pizarro would meet directly with the sitting Incan emperor, a man by the name of Atahualpa. You can see an artist's kind of rendition here um, of that experience, which I'll be describing in just a second here. Atahualpa, it was, according to Spanish records, um, in this initial meeting, was surrounded by an 80,000 man army. He was carried on a litter by 80 attending lords, with a mass of 2,000 servants that were preceding the entourage, uh, freeing the roadway of any type of impediments or debris that might lead to the discomfort of the dive-in upon which Atahualpa was suspended. Under the priest, the lead or head priest under Pizarro's command, the priest moved forward, presented Atahualpa with a Bible, and was asked to convert to Christianity on the spot. The Incan emperor, perhaps not understanding what was being asked of him, and also it's important to understand, being a quasi divine entity, a leader, head of state himself, um, was not inclined to do so. Um, and so, could kind of discarded, again, according to Spanish uh, records, tossed the Bible, kind of discarded it offhand. This was an insult to the Spanish, who proceeded to attack on the spot immediately. The Indian uh, people, the Incan people, were more concerned about the safety and livelihood of their emperor, holding his litter aloft, sacrificing themselves in order to maintain that stature. And as a result of this conflict, thousands were slaughtered. Others, of course, were terrorized by Spanish horses, the use of steel weapons. It was technologies or elements like this that were new to the uh, Native American experience. Again, prior to first contact, there were no horses in the Americas, which again we'll talk about with when we turn attention to the Columbian Exchange in just a few minutes here. The Spanish were able to capture and imprison Atahualpa. They held him for a period of 8 months, during which time they demanded a ransom for the emperor's freedom. And again, it's important to understand the central role that this imperial entity played in the life of the empire and the Incan people themselves. I mean, Atahualpa was seen as a sun god within the Incan um, uh, society and culture. He held absolute authority over virtually every aspect of Incan life. And so, as a result, the Incan people paid um, a ransom in gold that was, according to, again, Spanish records, able to fill a room 22 feet long by 17 feet wide at a height of over 8 feet. making it perhaps, if not the largest, one of the largest ransoms paid in all of human history. That is how central, how pivotal Atahualpa was as an imperial figure to the Incan people themselves. Let's see how much time we got left here. Okay, so what were the effects of encounters? Well, this gets us into aspects of the Columbian Exchange, which I'll begin to talk about here in the second part and perhaps wrap up in the third part. Um, so, these early encounters would forever change populations geographically, um, um, environmentally, or ecologically speaking. Um, and this is what's known as the Columbian Exchange. And really, it can be broken down into three different characteristics: the transfer of plants, animals, and also disease. With regard to, and to give you some examples of how pervasive and extensive this contact and uh, uh, crossing over and exchange was. With regard to things like animals, you had Europeans introducing not only horses, which is uh, one new kind of animal being introduced to the Americas, to the Western Hemisphere, but also Europeans introduced pigs, cattle, goats, sheep, chickens. All of these were new to the Western Hemisphere, being brought over from Europe. Europeans did take back with them one animal, the turkey, which was, kind of unique, you might say, to the Americas. With regard to plants, it was much more extensive. And I mean, I'll rattle off a long list here. It's important to understand that this list is incomplete, and it's not necessarily necessary for you to memorize all of these, but just to give you an idea of the extent to which the exchange was taking place. Europeans were bringing over, as far as plants were concerned, things like apples, peaches, pears, apricots, plums, oranges, mangoes, lemons, olives, almonds, grapes, bananas, cherries, sugarcane, rice, 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 wheat, oats, barley, onions, radishes, okra, dandelions, cabbage. And again, that's an incomplete list. In return, Europeans were taking back from the Americas back to Europe maize or corn, tomatoes, sweet peppers, chilies, potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, pumpkins, tapioca, beans, coca, peanuts, pecans, pineapples, guavas, avocados, blueberries, and of course, tobacco. Now, with regard to the most consequential, you might say, of the Columbian exchanges comes in the form of disease. Um, in the interest of time, I'm going to save that for part three. So bear with me and I'll be right back.